going on, everyone? Alex Miller from the Eagle, joined by my colleague Travis L. Brown. I'm back in College Station, but Travis, this guy, he's at SEC Media Days in Hoover, Alabama, with the great Robert Cessna, bringing you content all week. It's talking season, Travis, and we're back. Didn't get to do SEC Media Days last year, so before we get into kind of day one action, can you just kind of set the scene of what things are like? I know it's a little different over there right now.
Well, it's apparently just like in College Station, it's raining season here too because it's thunderstorming outside. So if you hear any loud claps of thunder, it's not Robert Cessna running down the hallways. It is actually weather. But yeah, this is the circus. This is the circus SEC season, talking season, like they say. But it's just not quite the same circus as usual. There's a reduced capacity because of COVID-19 protocols. So there's less media here. Everyone's a little bit more spread out. Some people got full week credentials. Some people got single day credentials. So we'll see if there's a bigger wave of media that comes on, let's say Wednesday when Alabama and Texas A&M are here. But it seems like there's just a little bit less electricity. Usually the players, when we talk to them, we kind of stand around tables and get to scrum style throw questions out. This year, players are at the podium. So in general, there's just less questions being asked at this SEC Media Days compared to SEC Media Days before.
For sure. But, great that you guys are getting to be back and getting to interact with players and coaches in person. I know that's something we as journalists have missed, kind of the interaction. But jumping right into it, today, SEC Media Days, Greg Sankey kicked things off, followed by Florida and South Carolina and LSU. But it was really Sankey, like we said before, Travis and Cease are going to be bringing you content all week. First story Travis filed today was based on some of Greg Sankey's comments on COVID protocols that will be coming up this season and how maybe they differ from last season. So Travis, can you just kind of explain what Sankey was kind of hitting on today in that regard?
Yeah, it really kind of came right off the coattails of what Bob Bowlesby said last week at the Big 12 Media Days, and it was as much of a you need to get vaccine pushed as legally he or anyone associated with these student athletes can make. He reiterated for both fans, for coaches, for student athletes, everyone involved in college football, how important vaccinations are for safely getting through another season of college football. He also said that 6 of 14 teams have reached the 80% vaccination threshold. So that's good. They're almost halfway there, but that still leaves more than 50% of teams who have not reached 80% vaccination. And once you hit these points, previously there's reporting by Ross Dellinger that said, vaccinated players won't have to do regular COVID testing. And if teams can reach 85% vaccination threshold, they won't have to wear masks around each other and things like that. Now, I actually got to go up and ask Greg Sankey some follow-up questions about some of this stuff. And one of the things he said is those reports about different kind of perks, if you would say, to vaccination hasn't necessarily been formally passed yet, but that there's the possibility and the probability that those will come in the future. I also asked him if Texas A&M was one of those 6 teams or not, and he said he hadn't directly asked. He isn't in knowledge of which teams they are, was his formal statement to me. So that's an interesting point. But the point that comes off of what Bob Bowlesby said too was that they haven't instituted any of the scheduling buffers like they had last season to accommodate for if there's an outbreak on a team for rescheduling of games. And because there's no buffer, you can kind of see the writing on the wall that if these teams don't get vaccinated and if there are outbreaks on these teams, which you put them below the minimum to play, then it's not like this year they can request a rescheduling. They're saying that as of right now, the obvious choice is a no contest and a forfeit. And so none of this stuff has necessarily been passed or completely and fully agreed upon yet. And in fact, the 53 player minimum that was in place last year for a team to be able to play in football is still in place. But what Greg Sankey was pushing today was that there's the athletic directors and the voting members, the voting stakeholders say, let's take away that minimum and proceed forward with the idea that if you can't field a team, you don't play. And what's interesting about that is steps put into place where they can't necessarily tell athletes go get vaccinated, but they can have coaches give the coaches a tool to point at an athlete and say, hey guys, you don't want to be the guy that got sick and made everyone else sick. And then we had to forfeit this game because you like put it in Texas A&M situation. A lot of expectations towards the Aggies, high expectations this year that maybe that could be a playoff team this year. Well, if you have to forfeit the New Mexico game because you had COVID-19 outbreaks, and that goes into your loss column now instead of just a canceled game like Ole Miss last year. How is the committee going to handle that? Because it's a loss. It's going to have to be a loss, and that could put players in a really precarious situation. So he said he made a clear point in the speech to say that the COVID vaccine isn't political. It is a health and safety measure that science backs up towards going out and having a normal football season. And it does seem like there is a level of ratcheting down that can happen with, you don't want to be the guy that made your whole team get sick.
For sure. It seemed as if the COVID vaccine stuff, that was definitely one of the biggest topics today. Something we're going to hear about all week, though, is name, image, likeness. And that was something that Sankey kind of touched on, asking for a little uniformity across the board. What can you say just about what he was saying? And then we'll get into maybe some other comments others made about it.
Well, one of the players, and I just have my roster not here there, the LSU player, the one of the funniest moments of the day, as I open up my handy dandy media guide here, and I know it's their offensive lineman. His name escapes me, from Houston, Austin
Deculus.
He has the big lettuce, the long flowing locks of hair, and they ask if let's say Sports Clips would give him a certain amount of money and name, image, and likeness, would he cut his hair? And he said, actually, it's up to my girlfriend. She's the one who wanted it. So that was a funny moment. But yeah, Greg Sankey, the thing that he had to say was that it's an important step in the right direction for these student athletes, but he called upon federal legislation to help regulate some of these things. And what he means by that is, you have to go back to the NCAA versus Alston case that got settled by the Supreme Court here recently, that the opinion by Justice Kavanaugh that opened everything up and kind of said, hey, NCAA or NCAA athletes, bring anything to us, because we've pretty much kind of said that in this one narrow case in NCAA versus Alston, that the NCAA is violating antitrust law. So bring more stuff about player compensation to us, and we're probably going to rule in your favor, giving a very strong paraphrase to what he said there. With that in mind, the NCAA, when they did institute a little bit of guidance on NIL a couple weeks ago to circumvent some states not having NIL legislation on their books, they made it very broad because they didn't want to start clamping down on little specific restrictions that would maybe bring on a lawsuit from players further on and kind of move this whole Supreme Court case further. So they left it really broad. Now, if the federal government can come in and give the NCAA some actual legislative antitrust passes, saying, yes, we realize that you can't work as an antitrust, but we're going to pass legislation that lets you do this with athletes, and now it's legally on the books, then they can start formulating a framework for what NIL looks like. So he called for some of that legislation on NIL that gives them the safeguards to not fall prey to antitrust legislation, like what happened with Alston versus the NCAA. And he definitely made a strong case for that. When it came to the players and coaches, a lot of it was just talking about how do you manage this? I thought one of the most telling things is that Orgeron from LSU, head coach, said one of the things he's the most worried about is, what if you have player A that's getting $100,000 for doing job XYZ, and you have player B who's getting a lot less than that or nothing, or the scales are not even here. How do you manage the chemistry in the locker room and manage those maybe hurt feelings or jealousy that might happen? And he said that's one of the biggest things that he's worried about moving forward with this stuff, is how to manage those dynamics. But he did say one of the ongoing conversations that he's having with his team is there is a time and place for NIL stuff, and there's also a time and place for academics and for football. And when it's time for academics and football, put the NIL stuff away and only break that out when it's the proper time for that kind of stuff. And that was one of the most telling conversations that had to happen with NIL stuff today with players and coaches.
For sure. And you got a chance to talk with Ed Orgeron a little bit, or ask him, I should say, about NIL. And he mentioned that he's passed a lot of that on to Austin Thomas, who is the general manager for LSU's football program. He works with Edo day to day, kind of his personal right-hand man. Austin Thomas used to be a staffer under Jimbo Fisher for 2 years. Moving along, Travis, Shane Beamer, he made his SEC Media Days debut today. And you got a chance to ask him a question on just his thoughts of playing A&M every year. And it's been kind of a lopsided rivalry, or series, I should say. And, what did Coach Beamer have to say about facing the Aggies every year?
Yeah, I mean, very lopsided. This Gamecocks haven't won since A&M joined the Southeastern Conference. And we'll go ahead and credit you with my question, because we are the keepers, if as you will, of the Bonham Trophy. Both of us did, of course, stories on what that means, where it is, and how it got started a couple years ago.
We are self-proclaimed Bonham Trophy experts.
We really are. We really are. And so you said you had to ask him about the Bonham Trophy as you texted me. And so I thought, well, okay, there's not a lot of questions happening here. So I asked him about this series, then kind of threw in a caveat of, did you know it was a trophy game, and what he thinks about the A&M program. Now, he didn't really bite on the trophy, didn't answer anything, but we got some good responses about how being at Oklahoma before coming over to South Carolina, he knows the area, knows the players, worked in the past with former defensive coordinator. Why did I just forget his name? John Chavis. And I had a cease moment there. And just
at least you really said his name right.
There you go. And was really glad that is a team that's on the schedule year in and year out, but also knows that especially this year, it's going to be a tough test. So got a little word on the fierce trophy game rivalry between interdivisional rivals A&M and South Carolina with Shane Beamer. But interestingly enough, in his first year, had the longest filibuster of any of the coaches, I believe, which is coaches usually.
I think that was right.
Yeah, coaches usually get a little time to give their opening statement and then open up to questions. And in years past, there's been coaches that have taken advantage of that opening statement time to minimize how many questions come at the end. And not to say that he was filibustering, but he did have the longest opening statement, and I don't think he took a breath through the entire statement.
Well, I've got to say, so I watched Sankey's whole thing. I watched Beamer's whole thing. I got bits and pieces of Mullen and Orgeron. And I got to say, for Beamer being a first-time head coach, he was really savvy up there with some of the stuff he was saying. He did a pretty good job, I thought.
Yeah. He didn't salute Bob Holt when he came up, like everyone else tends to do, but no, never mind. So yeah, he was polished, and
have to salute Bob Holt.
I know, dropped a little tidbit too in there about how his dad fielded several calls from Alabama wanting to hire him, and he didn't bite. So interesting stuff from the son, the youngest Beamer.
For sure. Well, Travis, one thing I've got to note, when I turned it on, they have SEC Network. They've got all their cameras, and they pan in the room. And it took me about 2 minutes to go, where's Waldo? And there's Robert Cessna sitting in the back middle with his Hawaiian shirt.
He was wearing a nice, kind of grayish green. It wasn't as in your
Yeah.
face today, but of course, Robert Cessna has to wear a Hawaiian shirt to SEC media.
Is the Tropicana Punch shirt in the rotation this
I
week?
don't think so. I don't think maybe in one of we'll probably try to do these every day after these, and maybe one of the days we can go over to the closet and pull out the array of options that Robert Cessna has today or this week.
We're gonna have to find one that's like equivalent to Tiger Woods Sunday Red
Yes, for
for
sure, for
him.
sure. Alex, I know we about ran through everything we talked about having today. You got to watch some parts. What stood out to you from what you heard today at SEC Media Days?
Yeah, I really a lot of it came from Shane Beamer of just the outlook of that South Carolina program because they have not been too hot lately. And I think he understands it's going to take time. And that's a team A&M's going to have to face every year. And it's a team that we mentioned A&M's had their number every year. And so, I'm really curious to see how this is going to go. Obviously, he comes from a very he's had the ability to coach under guys like Steve Spurrier and Lincoln Riley, and he's a player's coach. It looks like. I mean, and that's a state where right now you're really competing against Clemson, with no doubt, and in the SEC East. Florida and Georgia have really just dominated things the last few years. I mean, nobody else has really gone toe to toe against them. Kentucky's had a good season here and there, but other than that, it's really just been the Gators and Bulldogs. So I'm really curious to see how it goes this first season for South Carolina, and I'm really curious to see how long it takes for Shane Beamer to try and right that ship. I wish I could have gotten a little longer to listen to LSU, but had to take care of some duties here at the home front. But I'm sure I'm going to get to catch up with all that and what people are going to write like UNC's
There you
in the
go.
coming week.
Edo was asked a lot about some of the scandals and accusations that have been made, and most of that got deflected. So there wasn't really a whole lot of new information there, and that people were maybe expecting and wanting from him. Dan Mullen got asked what his favorite Star Wars movie was, and he wouldn't answer because he dressed up as Darth Vader before and didn't.
Did you see his shoes?
I didn't get to up close. I'm not as much of a sneakerhead as a lot of y'all are, so I wouldn't been able to name.
Honestly, I'm not that big of a sneakerhead either, but I know he always comes out in some kind of crazy J's because Florida is sponsored by Jordan. So
For sure. One other thing that I thought was interesting was the thing they went ahead in the future a little bit. Greg Sankey did, talking about that new TV contract that they're going to have starting in 2024 with ESPN or Disney, really, and it'll manifest itself on ESPN. One of the interesting things is if you look at what's going on at the Big 12 and their ESPN contract, a lot of those games are getting put onto the ESPN Plus platform. And so what it sounds like is the SEC in some ways is going to move into that same direction, so that probably some of the games that have not a whole lot of value other than a team is going to win, those might get bumped over to the SEC Plus subscription service. And he said the advantage of that is that if you know well in advance that, and I'm putting some words in here, he didn't talk about teams being good or bad, but if you know in advance that this is not going to be a marquee game, it can automatically just get pushed to the ESPN Plus platform, and then they can release times for those games way in advance, maybe even as early as summer, so that as the future goes on with this new platform and you start looking at football schedules, more of those times might be filled in as you go on kickoff times earlier, and it won't be a 1 or 2 weeks in advance kind of thing. That's a plus that goes into that ESPN contract.
All right. Well, Travis, I think that's all we've got for day one. We'll probably be back tomorrow talking more talking season, as they say. So thanks for tuning in, everyone. And be sure to check theeagle.com for all the coverage from SEC Media Days. And we'll be back soon.